sacrifice 32 minutes to an individual that doesn't give a damn about anybody's time or purpose.
Have you ever watched a political battle on reality TV that was so dramatic it was like a train accident? We're about to venture into the wild west of Dolton, Illinois, so get your hats on, folks. Even though Mayor Tiffany Henyard reign is uninteresting, the excitement was high since your favorite controversial show is about to premiere. The locals were eager to vent their frustrations on Mayor Henyard with their ideas and more than a little annoyance. And the usual village board meeting on Monday night was on the point of turning into a full-fledged political protest because of claims of drama and power struggles.
Here to arrive, we'll give another 5 minutes. Mayor Tiffany Henyard delayed the meeting.
A seemingly inconsequential issue caused the scheduled meeting to start 30 minutes late, but it was actually the impetus for a bigger wave of simmering discontent that quickly burst into open hatred. When a local citizen seizing the microphone made a clear and sharp comment that perfectly encapsulated the mood of the crowd, tensions reached a breaking point. "We just handed someone who doesn't have 32 minutes." The gathering found resonance in the statement, which sparked a wave of general discontent that prompted other people to speak up. As each person had their turn at the microphone, their voices trembling with a mixture of anguish, despair, and growing wrath, they spoke with a definite sense of resolution, as though they had all reached a realization. Give a damn about anybody's time other than hers. Their grievances revolved around a single catchphrase that became more and more powerful during the meeting, finally making it impossible for even seemingly unaffected Mayor Tiffany Henyard to ignore. The refrain "Clean House 2025" evolved from a simple expression of dissatisfaction to a resolute and unambiguous directive that reflected the community's desire for drastic change as participants took turns speaking. Speaker after speaker reiterated a fervent and urgent feeling. Each contribution intensified the room's sense of discontent and determination, focusing the energy of the audience around a single goal. Following the removal of a leader they viewed as inappropriate and insensitive, the meeting's focus shifted from discussing everyday concerns to serving as a rallying cry for accountability and change. Gathering quickly evolved. Such a profound moment. One local, who was particularly enthusiastic about civic involvement, emphasized the gravity of the issue and urged their neighbors to realize how important they were in determining the town's future. They adamantly stated that we cannot permit her to be mayor, so we must go to the polls and carefully cast our votes. This sincere request resonated, and, as their frustration turned into a fervent and unified cry for change, the audience cheered. There was a sense of irritation and newfound resolve in the air, as if the community had finally decided that the status quo was untenable. It was charged with the intensity of long-suppressed worries being finally expressed. The crowd's undiluted intensity meant that Henyard's time was bound to be. The meeting was nearing its conclusion, and the moment for action had arrived. It was dominated by a crescendo of repressed rage and intense fury that symbolized a turning point, as years of dissatisfaction erupted into a single act of action. As each speaker entered the stage, the emphasis changed from personal complaints to a movement that called for action to restore accountability and openness in local politics. As attendees urged their neighbors to overcome indifference and take an active role in the voting process, the atmosphere in the room transcended its specific setting and grew to represent more than just local issues. An impromptu platform for venting complaints evolved into a driving force that demonstrated a community that had reached a breaking point and was ready to fight for significant change. Microcosm of a greater struggle for responsibility, proving the power of collective dissatisfaction when channeled toward a shared goal. Their unshakable commitment reverberated throughout the room as one passionate voice followed another, bringing neighbors together in a common goal. Following an administration characterized by increasing criticism and growing dissatisfaction, the meeting was now being pushed by a people that was determined to demand better leadership. Ended as the start of a movement driven by the steadfast resolve of a community united in their refusal to put up with the unacceptable any longer, rather than as a normal civic event.
Know this, I am gonna come through on a landslide, just like Trump did. No.
Fury in a tone of contempt, proving that their critiques of her did not, in reality, change the way she approached the situation. Henyard used the altercation to reaffirm her dominance in a scathing speech that was meant to both provoke and cement her position. Her words resonated across the chamber, indicating that she intended to maintain strong control. "I am seated now. Whether you like it or not, I am your mayor." She made her statement using the well-considered. This audacious statement, issued by someone who was well aware of the criticism it would draw, was more than just a statement. It was a challenge, challenging her detractors to confront her while reaffirming her firm grip on the position. Instead of calming her critics, it just made them more disdainful. Unfazed, Henyard persisted in her diatribe, equating herself with former President Donald Trump and connecting their leadership philosophies to the scandals that appear to follow them both. She portrayed herself as a strong and misunderstood leader despite a flurry of unfair criticism, even implying in her own words that she would win by a landslide. Victory portrays herself as the target of constant criticism and as a contentious figure who defies adversity. This story not only acted as a defense, but also as a rallying cry, establishing her as a leader who was standing by her principles despite mounting public criticism and demands for her resignation. For many in the room, it was the latest in a troubling pattern of behavior that showed her growing estrangement from the community she claimed to serve, but it was also proof of her strength and determination in defying the demands of a vociferous opposition. She was obviously unprepared to acknowledge the unhappiness coming from the crowd or to respond to demands for accountability, as seen by her harsh and disdainful tone. Even some of her former admirers were offended by her comments, which they saw as another piece of evidence of her failure to take accountability for the mistakes and scandals that had dogged her time rather than as a display of strength. Henyard's failure to take criticism seriously marks the demise of a leader who was more focused on maintaining her power than on addressing the real problems her people were facing. Even though it was shocking, her defiance was regarded as a top priority. Each instance of disobedience seemed to reinforce her status as a leader more focused on retaining her power than encouraging unity or open and respectful administration, which led critics to see her presentation and control over the community's requests as indicators of a larger problem. Despite the distance between the garden and the people, who were more frustrated with her inability to address their grievances or engage in productive participation, supporters of Henyard observed a unique quality of them. They perceived her as someone who unfairly singled out someone who was facing harsh criticism for having the boldness and unrepentant attitude to lead in a different way, proving that she was a leader who would not be intimidated by public opinion or the demands of public scrutiny. Leaning into this perception, she portrayed herself as a historical person, which struck a chord with a tiny but vocal group of individuals who valued her persistence and thought she was prepared to stand alone if needed to achieve her goals. As locals complained, the meeting attendees showed a growing understanding that her dismissive, confrontational, and uncompromising leadership style was untenable. Her controversial tenure would ultimately be vindicated, much like others who have faced intense opposition during their time. Her remarks that night served as a reminder of the stark contrast between Henyard and her hometown, caused many people to realize how, by developing a difficult relationship with the same people she was elected to represent, she appeared to deepen the divide and strengthen the perception that she was a leader divorced from the concerns and needs of the community, rather than relaxing or motivating her audience.
At the conclusion of this investigation, I will provide an assessment of the findings.
We are Dolton citizens, not your subjects or employees, and since you are departing with this resolute statement, you will not treat us this way any longer, said a brave local in a confrontation with Mayor Tiffany Henyard that embodied the town's long-simmering frustrations with firm resolve. This confrontation caused tension in Dolton to explode into a spectacle of raw emotion and political struggle. Their disobedience sparked a violent altercation that extended beyond. What does a simple political debate consist of? A defiant audience was not intimidated by Dolton Henyard's statements, which reverberated throughout the crowded auditorium and were often disrespectful of critics. One determined citizen responded forcefully to her comments, which energized the audience. The audience was energized by the citizen's fervent challenge, which led to screams and clapping that demonstrated the crowd's unity and their shared resolve to stop tolerating This incident, which was seen as the mayor's arrogance and overreach, was a bold challenge to Henyard's power, as well as a resounding statement of the town's persistent demand for accountability and respect. It also demonstrated the people's strong will to not be ignored or silenced. Dolton's growing dissatisfaction with leadership that was perceived as distant and unconcerned with the issues of its citizens was demonstrated by this interaction, which was more than just a personal altercation. The tension in the room was clear as Henyard, who is known for her characteristic disobedience, attempted to maintain her position of power, but her comments further reinforced the audience's perception of a leader who was disconnected from the problems confronting the neighborhood. The community's will was powerfully demonstrated by the cheers and ovation that followed the resident statements. These residents were ready to speak up and were no longer content to sit on the sidelines. This meeting not only reflected political disagreements, but also demonstrated the resilience of democracy at the most grassroots level, as demonstrated by Henyard's insistence on control and the community's zeal in reversing the conflicts showed the power of group action and showed that the opinions of the people matter, even in small towns, and that they can overthrow even the most powerful leaders. Additionally, rather than merely objecting to policies or leadership choices, the residents of Dolton recovered their role as the actual representatives of authority in their community. A more significant problem in Dolton was also highlighted by the exchange. During Henyard's tenure, the town was dealing with leadership it could no longer rely on, which was marked by allegations of financial mismanagement, contemptuous leadership, and a disengagement from the community. Has been the target of criticism. The tension at this particular meeting was not an isolated episode. Rather, it was the culmination of months or perhaps years of frustration. People used the forum as a venue to express their dissatisfaction and demand change because they were tired of false promises and what they saw as a lack of trust in the government. A town banded together to demand responsibility and a leader who was asserting her power in the face of growing opposition, and the passionate discussion was a reflection of a bigger battle. It became evident that instead of suppressing opposition, her resistance just made her critics stronger. The heated environment of the meeting room illustrated the effectiveness of grassroots action, while her fans view her stubbornness as a show of strength and her opponents as evidence of her failure to accept responsibility. This clash was a turning point and a symbolic moment of empowerment for a community that demanded to be heard. Dolton inhabitants were no longer content to be passive observers in their own governance. The people in the room believed that change was long overdue, and as the conflict developed, it became clear that this was about more than just political disagreements. It was about a community's right to hold its leaders accountable, to demand better, and to challenge them. Dolton's residents demonstrated that even the smallest voices may overthrow established authority at that precise moment by sending a strong message that they would no longer tolerate rejection or denial, and that they were ready to take charge of their town's future. The town had a lasting effect on Henyard. The discussion persisted long beyond this specific meeting since it was the subject of an FBI investigation. By May 2024, administration inquiries about village spending had further heightened public discontent, the report said. A substantial shortfall in the village's general budget was found by former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who also investigated Henyard financial operations. The town's general fund balance fell from $5.61 million USD in 22 to $3.65 million USD. Additionally, Lightfoot's voiced worries around the overuse of, as evidenced by the amount of purchases for which receipts were missing, the township's financial troubles, people's worries about an agenda that hasn't been thoroughly examined, and the lack of openness surrounding its finances only make the village credit card worse. Another startling discovery was that on January 5, 2023, 43,000 Americans made purchases on Amazon. The long-running dispute between Henyard and the trustees culminated when Christopher Gonzalez and Henner, who had been in charge of 2 trustees in the township, Carmen Carlisle, skipped a board meeting, preventing a vote to elect a new trustee to replace Henyard as police chief, after a village official said that Henyard's attempt to name Ronald Beer as the new chief without board consent was unlawful. Gonzalez voiced his worries and inquired as to why we were being hurried to a meeting. Giving Henyard too much power, particularly in financial concerns, worried him and Carr. They feared a return to the dubious spending habits of the previous lease after. Even the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board, which at the time of his employment was charged with bankruptcy fraud, ruled that Lacey did not have the required paperwork and was not requalified to be a police chief at this time. This made the legal problems with the former interim chief worse. The board suggested in the letter that she suspend Bird from public service until the required documentation was filed and his eligibility was determined during the legal battles, given his prior legal proceedings alleging political or workplace retaliation. Regarding staffing, the landlord, Janetta Hall, disclosed that the couple had not made rent payments since August, resulting in behind rent and late fines totaling thousands of US dollars. Hall, however, denied this claim. The judge eventually overturned several of her decisions after permitting Burge SDR to serve as interim head for 30 days. Hall further claimed that Henyard and Woods had altered the garage door code in the locks to keep her out of the property, despite Henyard's public relations attempts to deflect attention from the persistent problems. Her fragile status was further highlighted by the eviction case. Reliable Gunn questioned the event's timing, saying it was a last-ditch effort to placate the public while avoiding significant township problems, despite the fact that many people appreciated the gift. Some residents voiced their frustration by comparing the numerous posters to Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's propaganda strategies, which highlighted the hen's commanding presence and influence on the village's public image. In addition to Pinard's self-promotional exploits, which were already combustible, public relations gimmicks and manipulation clearly had no effect on the public. The distinction between public duty and private protection was muddled by enormous billboards that featured her picture emblazoned with phrases like "keeping my promises," "fighting for my residents," and claims that she had used police personnel as personal bodyguards. We inquired as to how long the scenario would persist because the residents felt indignant and unjust. Although we didn't object to her having a security detail, calls for responsibility and change were sparked by the use of public monies for private gain and the extreme measures taken to silence criticism. When Henyard called the police on employees who were taking down banners with her picture and the term super mayor, things became more heated. Supervisor Henyard, Tiffany Henyard, has stated that her narrative is far from over, but several trustees disagree. Campaign for re-election in the middle of political unrest, her already compelling story is further enhanced by sensational charges and escalating controversy. She makes a conscious effort to mend her legacy and regain control of the story that presents her as a strong leader. Notwithstanding Shiz's assertions, a growing number of Dolton citizens view Henyard's campaign as a watershed moment that presents a chance to confront the scandals and ethical lapses that have dogged her term and decide whether the town will continue to back a leader who many feel has not lived up to their expectations. Corruption because of the lingering legacy of bad leadership and power abuse, which also presents a political challenge to her adversaries. Dolton is caught between carrying on Kennard's vision, albeit one that is cloaked in suspicion, and starting over with a fresh start that puts accountability and transparency for Henyard first. Her re-election campaign, in her opinion, is a test of her strength and resolve, an opportunity to prove her detractors wrong, and a bold attempt to cement her reputation in the community as a leader who refuses to face the repercussions of her own scandal. Her opponent minimizes the valid grievances of her supporters in Henyard, who are inspired by her bravery and unwavering refusal to back down, and views her re-election campaign as a desperate attempt to retain power. They contend that she is a visionary leader who is battling against political sabotage and systemic obstacles, because the campaign's theatrics and Dolton's strong political climate have garnered notice. The community is fed up with her leadership. The conclusion of this election could decide not only Henyard's fate, but also Dolton's future path. Therefore, the stakes are higher than ever. Interest from across the state is turning this small-town contest into a broader discussion about the ethics of public officials and their duty as the pivotal election draws near. It is clear that this election is important for Dolton's history, regardless of the outcome, and it may have a lasting impact on the town's political and social fabric for years to come. Will this election be a vote against Henyard's leadership and the end of her contentious 10-year rule? Or will she survive the scandal and win a second term? And slogans that draw attention to the more difficult parts of leadership in the face of hardship, ambition unbridled by accountability, and the perseverance of a community for justice since her recently announced re-election campaign surfaced in the midst of the scandalous political turmoil. Those who are aware of Tiffany Henyard's stubborn leadership style will not be surprised by her decision to run for another term, but it has certainly sparked a contentious public debate, with many people seeing her bid as a calculated attempt to change her ways. Complicated by accusations and growing disagreements, more and more Dolton citizens see Henyard's campaign as a watershed that presents a chance to confront the scandals and ethical transgressions that have transpired during his rule. As Dolton's first female mayor and a symbol of advancement, she was once praised as a trailblazer. However, the storm of scrutiny has caused a significant division among the groups she claimed to lead, giving them the opportunity to regain control of the narrative. Despite what the opponents say, she portrays herself as a powerful leader. The re-election campaign is more than simply a political battle. It's a test of her strength and resolve, an opportunity to prove her detractors wrong, and a bold endeavor to cement her legacy in the community. Supporters of Henyard, who are inspired by her audacity and unweaving, will argue that she is a visionary leader who is encountering political sabotage and challenges as time passes. To her critics, however, it symbolizes the unbridled ambition and audacity of a leader who refuses to accept the consequences of her own scandals, which have left Dolton at a. The drama surrounding Henyard's campaign has caught the state's attention, and the political atmosphere in Dolton is tense as the pivotal election approaches its conclusion. Her opponents, on the other hand, disregard the valid grievances of a public weary of her rule and view her re-election campaign as a desperate attempt to retain power. The main question is whether Henyard can win a second term, recover her reputation, and weather the storm of scandal, or if this election will be a referendum on her leadership and bring an end to her contentious tenure. On the ethics of leadership and the accountability of public officials,